Hey guys, welcome to the next episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. In today's episode, we're going to be covering Rahkshi themed mocks. You may ask, what is a Rahkshi? Well, a Rahkshi is, surprisingly, it's actually more of a suit of armor for a krater. So there was a little krater inside the back of the Rahkshi from the old sets from back in the day, and they were essentially kind of the sons of Makuta, one of the main kind of bad guys for one of the themed years of Bionicle. And over the course of the years in the fandom, they've very much taken a life of their own. Everybody loves Rahkshis, people love using them for character designs, as well as a whole bunch of the pieces that came with Rahkshi sets have been used very commonly in all sorts of different mocks. And so they're quite a staple to the community, so I figured it's about time I do an episode on Rahkshi-themed mocks. So today we're going to cover 4 Rahkshi-themed mocks from the community, and have a little bit of a chat about a couple other alternatives that you can look into with Rahkshis with some sort of 3D printed stuff, and even going a little bit custom with any kind of Rahkshi-themed mock. So let's begin. The first mock that we have today is by Dylan Meaves and is called Son of Makuta Heat Vision. So this was a part of the Son of Makuta Eye collab, which was a whole bunch of different builders who came together and made a bunch of really awesome, very detailed Rahkshi mocks. We'll see another one in the episode, but there's also a whole bunch of other ones that you can check out, and I'll have a few links in the description below to those things. So one thing that's really awesome about this mock by Dylan is the fact that he's used a lot of CCBS to make a Rahkshi. I always think it's super cool to see really old G1 concepts reinterpreted into a CCBS style. You know, I remember when Bionicle G2 was still alive and thriving, people were speculating, would we get G2 Borak or Rahkshi in the G2 style and stuff like that. And there were all sorts of rumors or supposed leaks that turned out to be fake of sets in that vein. And I actually thought that was a really cool concept. It is really awesome to see those old ideas reinterpreted in G2 concepts or styles or using those specific parts. I think that's a very fun challenge as well, as to make a mock kind of based around that, and this is a great example of that. One thing that's super cool about it is the custom head here. It's kind of been able to add more of a mouth to it, makes it look a little bit more like the Rahkshi that we saw in the original Mask of Light movie, and it's just a really cool way to redo that head. Obviously the Rahkshi head is a very staple, awesome looking part, but it's a cool thing to note is that you can actually kind of create your own custom version. I really like that. Another thing I really like is the overall spine on this mock. It's simply just using a whole bunch of ways to connect these Kit Orange Hero Factory shells here, and then adding these quasar spikes on top. Each of the original Rahkshi sets had their own unique spine and unique weapon element. And I think it's really cool to see all the different Bionicle pieces that you can use to actually create a unique spine design. And it's even cooler too to see how simply layering all of these Hero Factory shells like this over the back, you can create a really sort of menacing, organic, Rahkshi-like spine design. It looks really cool. It's simple and very fitting to the CCBS build style as a whole. I also really like how the torso on this mock is built. Everything kind of stems off of the waist here. It's a very sort of small body as a whole, but it really works to create this sort of Rahkshi build and silhouette and frame and everything. It's really cool to see. And if you look closely enough, you can sort of see the fairly simple construction, mainly focusing on using a bunch of Horde connects and these Mutter hands in grey. And it looks like there's even a few connections here where he's connected the socket into the Horde connect there. And now that is technically an illegal connection because you are putting stress on that part, but it is a really awesome technique and design to use in any kind of mock, and it creates a lot of really fun possibilities. So maybe that's something to try out, and as we can see here, it creates a really awesome overall torso design. So lots to love about this mock. Really cool to see a more sort of simplified CCBS version of a Rahkshi. But let's move on to the next mock, which is by Junkie Flex and is called Rahkshi Alec. Now, of course, Alec was one of the Baraki from another wave of Bionicle, and what I really like that Mr. Junkie Flex has done here is that he's combined a character and the sort of trope or design or style of a Rahkshi into one thing. And that's what I was saying before about how the community has really sort of taken to Rahkshis in a really nice way. There's all sorts of different characters that have kind of reinterpreted Rahkshis in unique and interesting ways. Rahkshis technically don't have a gender in the canon, but I know a whole bunch of people have made their Rahkshis have genders or have taken a lot of concepts or ideas from Rahkshis and twisted and turned them in interesting and creative ways. And I think this is a really nice example of that, taking the overall frame, the overall look of Archie, and then applying it to Alec. And it works really well on this mock, in my opinion. Using these Alec spines here in this really interesting green color, it's again a cool way to create a unique Rahkshi spine, and it's very fitting to Alec, who actually sort of naturally had that in the original set. I think that's really cool. We also spoke as well about how each Rahkshi had their own unique staff design, and so using these Bionicle G2 parts here to create a unique staff design, and then intertwining this little tube throughout the staff too, it looks really cool. It's a really unique looking staff, very fitting for a Rahkshi, and it's just a very nicely designed weapon. And it's very simple too, but it looks very fantastic in the end result, and I really like that. So that's always something to think about if you're making a Rahkshi mock. How can you interpret the spine design or the staff design? And also, apparently, how can you interpret the head design? In both of these mocks so far, they've had a very unique, different head design with, an actual posable jaw too. So interesting to see how the different tropes are forming across the Bionicle community, how fans have kind of reinterpreted Rahkshis from what they were in the original sets. We also see a digigrade leg design on this mock. Now, technically, the original Rahkshi didn't actually have the digigrade leg design, but it's really cool to see it on a Rahkshi, and it works surprisingly well. That's really cool to see. So again, really cool to see how people can kind of play with the concept of Rahkshis, as well as playing with other canon characters as well. Very cool. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Mitch Phillips, and is called Son of Makuta Shattering. Now, I think it's actually something to quickly note before. Each of the Rahkshi had very distinct and different elements. Before we saw the Rahkshi of Heat Vision, this time we see the Rahkshi of Shattering, and before, well, that was just Alec. But Rahkshi had very distinct and different elemental designs, and I'll go a little bit more into that later in the episode, but just for now, since we've already seen two of them that have distinctly mentioned that, may as well bring that up now, in case you weren't aware. So one thing I absolutely love about this mock is how accurate it looks to the look of Rahkshi in the Mask of Light movie. Rahkshi had this really awesome design with their mouth in that movie where their face kind of split apart and the crater would actually sort of come out like a tongue, and this mock almost perfectly captures that in a really beautiful way. I really, really like it. And again, we've seen all these really interesting and unique ways to reinterpret the Rahkshi head. And this, in my opinion, is definitely one of the best. It's so awesome to see how he's sort of used all these different claw and tooth pieces and things like that. And then we can see at the bottom of the jaw here, using some of these Exoforce hand pieces, which are such useful pieces. We always see those throughout every episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. And overall, he's managed to create this beautiful looking head design here. Very, very nicely done. We spoke before in Dylan's mock about how kind of layering all the individual CCBS shells in a specific manner and then attaching all these different spike pieces to them creates this really beautiful spine design. But we see on this mock a very different way of doing that. So instead of actually attaching the spines the typical way that you would, this mock attaches them the opposite way, sort of resting the shell kind of 90 degrees to the way you would normally rest it, and then finding additional ways of attaching the spikes coming out every so often. And it looks like a very, very simple connection to be able to do that. Just getting a really long piece of flex tube and then thinning that through all the different lightsaber hole rods in each of the different pieces of armor, and then every so often finding a way to get a lift arm in there, and then another claw piece to create that spine effect. It's a very, very effective design and a surprisingly simple execution to achieve that. Really, really cool to see. And then he's additionally buffed that out by adding in this sort of chain of socket pieces here towards the bottom, and that's cool too because it kind of helps it to sort of not flow everywhere. It kind of lets it rest in a nice placement, kind of places it nicely, that sort of thing. It's really, really cool. It kind of buffs it out a bit too and makes it flow better with the rest of the mock. Very simple design, but really, really effective and looks awesome. And I remember Shadow Gear talking about that to me once, and I think he actually might have mentioned it in a podcast, who knows. But using Flex Tube, it's actually such a helpful, beautiful part, and using it in a mock makes you achieve really professional, awesome-looking results, much like we see on this mock. So I definitely recommend, if you're planning a Bricklink order anytime soon, pick up a few Flex Tube parts because it's such a beautiful piece and there's so many possibilities that you can do with it. It's really, really cool to see. So again, we see a unique staff design here, a unique spine, a unique head, but something I really like about this mock that we hadn't necessarily seen in the others is this really unique foot design here. So it uses the original Rahkshi foot, but then it's been added to a little bit by adding in this sort of additional stuff underneath the foot, and then adding this sort of three-pronged claw design underneath that. And I think that looks super, super awesome. It's just a nice little way to kind of tweak the original design. It fits better with this mock. It looks a little bit more menacing, and overall this mock in itself looks very menacing. And that's just awesome. Really, really cool to see. Something else that's really cool too, I didn't really mention it before, but with the spine, it's simply just repeating a lot of the same part. And it's also really cool because this mock is very primarily dark tan, which is not a color you see used very often with a Bionicle or CCBS or Hero Factory mock. And what I like even more about that is, say you went on Bricklink and you literally just went to one store and bought one of the exact same part in the exact same color, it wouldn't be too expensive. And like we see on this mock here, you're able to achieve a really awesome result by simply just repeating the one part in a manner like this and letting it form pretty much the bulk of the mock. I would imagine that this mock started with that spine pretty much, and then everything else kind of spawned off of that. So that's something to kind of think about. Go online, sort of look for a part that you think you can use very well, buy a whole bunch of it, and then build a mock based around repeating that part in some way, because like we see on this mock, it achieves a fantastic result. And to some degree, it's relatively cheap and not that expensive to do so yourself, which is really awesome. So fantastic work, Mitch. Let's move on to the fourth Rahkshi mock I wanted to speak about, and let's talk about this one, which is the Silver Rahkshi of Chain Lightning by Lego Master 1378. So what I like so much about this mock is it's a lot closer to the original. A lot of the Rahkshis that we saw before were very heavily customized. All of them had different heads, different staves, and different spines to what we typically saw with a Rahkshi set, whereas this one is a lot more in line with what you would see in the original Rahkshi sets. But what's so cool about it is it's an additional kind of revamp to that style. You know, he's added in sort of CCBS legs and a different sort of foot and lower leg design, and he's also added in a few Hero Factory parts sort of extending the spine down on the back, which looks really nice. And then he's also added this CCBS torso on the front there to kind of give it more of a, you know, a different sort of chest torso look, and it looks very nice. And so I think that's cool. You know, you can, you don't have to go super complex like those mocks that we saw before. You can simply kind of revamp that original style and just add a few tweaks, detail it up a little bit, and still achieve a very awesome result. Something else I really like, just a nice little detail, we take a look at the back here, and he's added in this little rocket piece at the back there, just to kind of fill in that gap there. And it kind of rounds up the whole torso, kind of makes everything flow nicely together. It looks really, really cool. And I think that's always something to think about too. When you're building a mock, if you notice a gap, what sort of pieces can you put in there to kind of fill it in? Because as a result, it makes everything look more whole, everything's kind of unified. And often having gaps in a mock, and there's always exceptions to this rule, but often having gaps in a mock can make it look a little kind of unrefined and unfinished. And so finding ways to fill those gaps makes everything flow better. There's a nice sense of consistency throughout the mock. Everything's a bit more unified. It's just really nice. And I think that little detail in there is a great example of just how nice a mock can look when you do fill in some gaps. So nicely done. One thing I did want to touch upon on this mock is the fact that the Rahkshi itself is silver. Now, obviously, the original Rahkshi sets were all in the sort of main colors that you typically see in every Bionicle. And later, as Bionicle progressed, we got that Rahkshi head in silver, and we also got a silver Rahkshi spine and things like that. And so as a result, you technically could recreate a Rahkshi in silver. And as time went on, we even got Rahkshi heads in dark red or dark green or dark blue. And so you could actually recreate a whole bunch of different Rahkshi in a whole bunch of different colors as a result. And that leads me into a few other examples that I've got. I'm going to quickly touch upon this mock by BJJ838383 with his mock called Rahkshi Trio, where he has simply made 3 Rahkshi, which are exactly the same build that you saw from the original sets, but they've been colored in very unique colors that actually do not exist in the typical Bionicle purist colors, if you will. These are all, I assume, custom painted. He does not say on Flickr, but I imagine that he's either painted those themselves or perhaps they're bootleg pieces. I'm not too sure. But heck, if you really want to, play around and paint some of your parts, or look into buying some third-party masks, or look into any of the sort of, like molded masks or socket ball, all sorts of people like that, you can easily find different ways to paint a mask or get a mask in a color that it did not exist in production colors. And as a result, you can have a lot of fun making cool mocks like this. And something else that I think is really cool, we've of course spoken about spines and things like that. All 3 of these mocks have custom spines. Now, the purple Rahkshi and this orange Rahkshi here, those specific spines have been cut. So the purple Rahkshi uses these funky CCBS sword pieces here, which are quite long, and he's cut those down a little bit. But as a result, it creates a very nice little spine there. So if you are up to cutting your pieces, perhaps that's something you can try. And then this orange Rahkshi here uses this dragon wing here to create a really funky, awesome, almost like Mohawk style Rahkshi spine here. I really, really like that. It looks really good. And then we look at this light blue, medium blue Rahkshi here, and he uses some old scimitar sword pieces, some minifigure ones, to create this funky design here. And technically, I haven't tried it myself, but that possibly could actually be done without cutting pieces. So who knows, maybe you can pick up some minifigure weapons and put them into the Rahkshi spines, and we'll see what that does, because that actually could be totally legal, and you don't need to actually cut anything. So yeah, maybe you can play around with all sorts of other existing pieces and just see what you can do, because I'm sure the possibilities there are endless. Speaking of endless possibilities, if we look at this purple Rahkshi here, we can see that his specific staff uses a piece that I can't say I recognize, and I'm pretty sure it's custom. So on the subject of custom staves and spines and stuff like that, there is a builder known as Kohan Shaden. I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong, my bad. But he has done something called the Rahkshi project. So essentially what he did is he made 36 different Rahkshi spines and staff pieces. And essentially the reason for doing this was because, like I said before, in the canon there are a whole bunch of different types of Rahkshi, and all of them have very different elements and designs, color schemes and looks. And the majority of them we never actually saw canon pictures of. We were just simply told, oh, there's a Rahkshi of heat vision. He is yellow. And then, okay, actually, eventually we did get a yellow Rahkshi of heat vision. But, for example, there is a Rahkshi of quick healing. And we never actually got a canon version of what he looks like. But, according to the canon lore of Rahkshi, each one has a different spine, color scheme, and staff. And so this Rahkshi project was this guy making all of those in different and fun designs and ways. And it's really fun to just take a look through his album, which I will of course link in the description, so be sure to check it out, and just see all the different color schemes, all of the different staff designs, all the different spine designs, because they all look so cool and would have made really awesome sets, let's be honest. And I'm pretty sure, again, this link will also be in the description, here provides a few links to places where you can actually buy these custom-made staves and spines on a Shapeways store. So if you're actually interested in purchasing some of these and making some mocks with these funky parts, you of course can. So check the links in the description and you can do so yourself. Very cool. So that rounds it off for 4 Rahkshi themed mocks and a few other things to consider as well. And that's kind of our discussion on Rahkshis. They've kind of taken on a life of their own in the community and kind of become their own little thing, and it's really, really cool, to be honest. So maybe that's something to do. Break out some of your Rahkshi pieces, have fun playing with them and building with them, make some cool Rahkshi mocks, or even just take some of the tropes and concepts from Rahkshis and apply them to any kind of character or concept and see what you can do. Because there's some awesome pieces and some awesome kind of concepts for characters. It's very nice. Anyway, that's it for this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. If you would like to submit some of your own mocks to the show, you of course can. How you do so is through the email that you're currently seeing on your screen. Chuck me a few pictures, a link, some info on your mock, your name, all that sort of stuff, and then I will put it in the list, and then eventually it may appear on the show. Also, if you need to copy that email, you can. It's in the description below. And also in the description below are links to my social media, so you can check out some of my stuff, and you can also consider checking out my Patreon page, if you so please. Otherwise, that's it for the episode. Be sure to check the links in the description for all the things I discussed and all the mocks shown in the episode. Give those guys some love. They're some very talented and awesome people. That's it for today, guys. See you in the next episode. Happy building. Bye for now.